In this video, we'll show you the 3 reasons why supplementing with vitamin D may actually lead to hypoglycemia. Let's dive in. When you have hypoglycemia, maybe we feel more dizzy or shaky or lightheaded or weak, have heart palpitations, feel more anxious or moody, wake up in the middle of the night, have insomnia, need to frequently use the bathroom in the middle of the night. We have to eat consistently, even if we're not hungry. We feel that urgency to eat. And when we eat, we feel better, but it's only a temporary effect. Sometimes we feel disoriented, feel like we're going to pass out. You should take vitamin D because you live in a northern climate. That's what we're told, but I want to give you guys a different perspective on this. Now, it's going to take more than just an Instagram post or a reel to really create the whole context of what's needed with vitamin D. So over the next few minutes, I'll show you the exact reasons why me and my team typically will not recommend supplemental vitamin D, especially for those with hypoglycemia. Now, growing up in Michigan, supplementing with vitamin D was recommended just as often as like washing your hands because it's winter and everybody is deficient. I don't deny the importance of vitamin D because it's really a crucial nutrient when it comes to insulin sensitivity and blood sugar balance, thyroid health, immune health, but I do have an issue with automatically assuming that everybody needs to supplement with it just because they live in a northern climate, just because they get less sun in winter, or they're labeled as being deficient by conventional standards. Our gut reaction when we see that there's no sunlight, that we might be deficient, that we live in a northern climate, is that we need to fill the gap with a supplement. And in doing so, many times we ignore the intelligence of our body and of nature. And I'll talk about each of those reasons in just a second. Vitamin D isn't washed out of your system, unlike many other nutrients. I remember taking a vitamin supplement growing up, and every single time when I had to use the bathroom next, it would be like this yellow pee and smell like vitamins, right? And so I assumed by taking a multivitamin, you're automatically going to pee that out, or at least the excess out, and you're constantly going to be needing the addition of that vitamin every single day, right? With vitamin D, it's not a water-soluble vitamin, meaning we don't just pee it out. It's actually a fat-soluble vitamin that is stored in multiple places of your body, your fat, your muscle. And so how a fat-soluble vitamin really differs from a water-soluble one is that it sticks around in these places for longer. Now, normally your body releases stored vitamin D throughout the fall and winter, when the days are naturally shorter, gets dark at 4:30, and especially when you're active based on the research. Now, when we have more inflammation on our body, this actually uses up vitamin D very quickly and actually reduces our access to it. So think of your vitamin D stores as trying to fill up this bucket of water, right? And so we're taking the supplements, maybe we're eating the foods that have vitamin D in it. But as soon as we do that and we try to lift the bucket up, we notice that there's holes in the bottom. So if we just continue to supplement and continue to eat the foods with vitamin D, we're not really doing a whole lot to retain that vitamin D. What we really need to do is plug those holes so that when we do eat those foods, or when we do get the sunshine, or we do supplement with it, we actually hold on to that vitamin D, which is where we really receive the benefits of that. And we often think that when winter comes around or when fall comes around, that's when we should start focusing on vitamin D supplementation, right? But really, vitamin D status is built how you live, how you eat across the whole entire year. Because if we're not getting sunshine in the spring and the summer, we don't build up those stores of vitamin D. So we're running on low supply if we're not doing those things. Number two, if our body is more inflamed, we have little vitamin D stores to pull from. And so many of us end up in this situation where we're losing a lot of the vitamin D that we have. We didn't have a lot in the first place, and we're trying to play catch up by the time that we get to the fall and winter months, when in reality, what we probably should have done was really prioritize that sunlight during the spring and summer when that sun that promotes vitamin D production is more fully out. And then number two, doing the things with our lifestyle and our food that helps to lower inflammation on our body so we can retain more of that vitamin D that we do have. Now, that being said, if you feel like you missed the window for spring and summer to really maximize that sunlight, and you're still in the process of reducing that inflammation on your body, no worries. All is not lost. You're not doomed. Let's dive into why that's the case and how you can start turning things around. And so just a moment ago, I talked about how we kind of have this gap, or at least this perceived gap, where in the spring and summer months, we have the ability to make vitamin D because the sun is out, we have longer days, and we can spend more time outside. Versus the fall and winter months, we have shorter days and not a lot of sunlight, not a lot of sunny days, and therefore it's perceived that that's when we need more vitamin D to fill that gap of what nature is not providing. By doing that, we actually discount the intelligence of nature. So as it turns out, when there is less vitamin D in our environment, we are not SOL. And in fact, our body can make another hormone that has very similar functions as vitamin D, including hormonal balance, lowering inflammation, supporting immunity, improving metabolism. That hormone is called melatonin, and we produce melatonin more often in those times of the year where we have less sunlight. So think fall and winter. And so melatonin actually fills a big gap when we don't have this vitamin D in our environments because of the lack of sun. So how cool is that? When we don't have a crucial vitamin in vitamin D, because of the lack of light, we automatically create more of this melatonin. But in order for our bodies to produce more melatonin, we actually need less exposure to light. And when I say light, light in general. And so what many of us do in the fall and winter months, because it gets darker sooner, is we have lights on. We're on our devices more. We're on screens more. And that light disrupts our body's ability to produce this melatonin. And so if we already have a vitamin D deficiency, potentially, we have a melatonin deficiency because our body is not able to produce enough because we don't have the right habits, automatically we're deficient in both of these things, which can really exacerbate this vitamin D deficiency that we have because both of those things work on very similar pathways to support our bodies. And when we don't have both, that's when many people start to see the potential consequences of that. I almost compare it to this. If you ever seen like nurses in shift work, one works maybe 12 hours of the day, and then they switch at the 12-hour mark where the other person comes in to take over their shift. They share notes. They share what's happened within the last 12 hours, and then they work from the evening until the morning, and then the next person comes around, right? Vitamin D and melatonin work very similarly. Vitamin D works in the spring and summer months, and melatonin works in the fall and the winter months. And so if we apply this example to the nursing example, it'd be like vitamin D working a 12-hour shift and then melatonin not showing up. So vitamin D has to keep on working for the next 12 hours. That's how many of us live our lives, and what creates the big need for potential vitamin D supplementation to get maybe some of that benefit out of the supplement, because there still is a benefit to that supplement. But based on what we've seen with vitamin D in our clients, it's actually more risky than the benefits it provides. So this really goes to show that it's not just about another supplement. It's about looking into the context and seeing how you're living throughout the rest of the year, because if you're doing the things that help your body produce melatonin, whether that be going outside during the day, whether that be getting light outside, especially in the morning and throughout the day and before sunset, whether that be blocking light at night, or at least reducing your exposure to indoor lights, to devices, to phone screens, to TV screens, to computer screens, right? If you're doing those things, that helps our body produce more melatonin and us to be able to get the benefits that melatonin also provides, particularly in the fall and the winter months. Now, the last piece, because I wanted to paint more context to this vitamin D conversation so that you can go into the hypoglycemia area with a little bit more details as to why maybe supplementation actually isn't needed, right? Maybe those benefits that we're potentially getting from the supplement may actually be taken care of based on how we're living, right? I wanted to paint that context because that is the sole reason why many people take vitamin D supplements, right? It's to get a benefit out of it. And so I wanted to tackle this first and then get into the potential risks, especially involved with hypoglycemia when it comes to vitamin D supplementation. So the last piece, in many clients that are classified as vitamin D deficient, their practitioners, their doctors are only looking at one form of vitamin D, which is called storage vitamin D. And to break this down very simply, what I compare storage vitamin D to is the food that you have in your pantry. Maybe it's potatoes or rice or squash or bread. Maybe it's canned foods like tuna or beans. Maybe it's in your freezer. You have meat and vegetables, right? That is food that is not ready to go. We have to change it to some capacity in order to be able to eat it. We have to cook it. We have to unfreeze it. We have to change it in some sort of way in order to be able to eat that food. That is very similar to vitamin D. This storage form of vitamin D is 99% of the time the one that is tested, yet it's the one that we have to change in order to get the benefits out of. And so it's like basing the amount of food that you have only by what you have in your pantry or your freezer, not in your fridge. Who's to say you didn't meal prep for a week straight and have all of your meals done for that week? Who's to say that's not the case? Well, that's essentially what you're doing when you're looking at vitamin D in the storage form. You're only looking at the form that is not quite ready to be used. And at the very least, it doesn't tell the whole story. Many times, the decision to supplement with vitamin D is based on this storage form of vitamin D. And from research from Dr. Mayer in 2013, his team actually presented some research in terms of questioning whether any vitamin D values in the storage form that are above 21 actually present additional benefits when it comes to potential death or cardiovascularly. So we already have some potential questions, but 21 by many conventional standards would actually be classified as low vitamin D. So all in all, if we're just looking at the storage form, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, the form of vitamin D that's actually not tested 99% of the time is the one that we actually need to know. It's the active form of vitamin D. And I get why this often isn't tested. It's because many assume that we can tell the status of somebody based on their storage form. But also, this active form of vitamin D is a lot more of an expensive lab. And so it's more rarely tested. And then we assume, based on the storage form of vitamin D, do we have enough? And so what happens is when your body is more inflamed, kind of like I talked about at the beginning, our body uses up more of that vitamin D. And at the very start, what will happen is we will convert this storage form of vitamin D into the active form. And so it's like cooking the rice, cooking the potatoes, unfreezing the meat, cooking the vegetables, right? It's changing that food and producing something that we can actually eat. Same thing in our bodies. When we have more inflammation, we convert that storage form of vitamin D into active. When we do that, though, it lowers the storage form and it raises the active. If we don't test that active form, we'll see this very low storage form, not realizing all that vitamin D that we have has been converted into the active form. And so what we'll see in clients who are especially more inflamed is we'll see low storage form of vitamin D and then either normal or actually really high active vitamin D levels. And so by not testing the active form of vitamin D, we're really missing that interaction where potentially a lot of this low vitamin D conversation is actually caused by inflammation. So the question becomes, do you have a vitamin D deficiency or do you have excessive inflammation that is preventing your body from holding on to that vitamin D? For many of our clients, it's the latter. That wraps up the context around the benefits of vitamin D supplementation. I hope at the very least that gave you a new perspective around that to maybe question some of those benefits that you are getting and whether supplementation is worth it in your eyes. Now we can get into what are the potential risks with taking vitamin D, particularly when you have hypoglycemia. Let's dive into this. While the relationship between vitamin D supplementation and prediabetes, type 1, type 2 diabetes, those are often studied, research on vitamin D supplementation in the context of hypoglycemia is not. While the research is certainly limited, we have worked with hundreds of clients with hypoglycemia, and we have their histories. We know that they've either in the recent past, they have taken vitamin D or are currently taking it. We have their labs, both the storage and the active form of vitamin D. And we also have their mineral tests, which show us some of the minerals that vitamin D has the ability to impact. We have all that data. Plus, when clients are on the vitamin D, many of them report that it actually exacerbates their episodes. And when they go off, they see more stable blood sugar. I'm not going to necessarily say that that's going to happen for everybody, where they take vitamin D and they have low blood sugar, and then they don't take it, and then it all stops and your blood sugar stabilizes. But I am going to say that vitamin D creates this cascade effect, right? If you ever played dominoes where you've set them up like side by side, domino, 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 or building block, and you you run that all around your house, and then you hit one and it hits all of them over, that's essentially what vitamin D is doing within your body, right? It's not a direct hit most of the time, but it's more indirect in terms of how it impacts the very things that can lead to hypoglycemia. And a big part of that effect that vitamin D creates is mineral imbalances and deficiencies. And that is one of the primary reasons why it can potentially contribute to hypoglycemia. Let's dive into why. When you have hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, essentially at its core, what does that mean? It means your body does not have enough energy to continue functioning, and therefore we have symptoms of that. Maybe we feel more dizzy or shaky or lightheaded or weak, have heart palpitations, feel more anxious or moody, wake up in the middle of the night, have insomnia, need to frequently use the bathroom in the middle of the night. We have to eat consistently, even if we're not hungry. We feel that urgency to eat, and when we eat, we feel better, but it's only a temporary effect. Sometimes we feel disoriented, feel like we're going to pass out. And when we have those constantly throughout the day, we always need to bring food with us. We're always worried about how that food or how that activity or work is going to impact our blood sugar. And so we're on all day long, feeling anxious about how foods or activities are going to impact that. But also the low blood sugar in itself is very stressful, where over time it really depletes our body of the very energy we need to do our job, to be present with our family, whatever we do throughout the day. And it has a big impact on the quality of life for many people where they can't exercise, they can't work, they can't feel present at home, they can't go out to eat, they can't hang out at friends, they can't go to gatherings or holiday parties because of how all these situations, food and otherwise, impact their blood sugar. And so how does vitamin D relate to all of this? When we supplement with vitamin D, our body absorbs more calcium. Now, this is not necessarily bad in itself because our body does need calcium. It's an important mineral. The important piece to understand is when it's excessive calcium. And oftentimes this happens because vitamin D doses are so big. And as a result, calcium ends up in places that it probably shouldn't end up, which are cells and different soft tissues of the body where we don't really want them to be hardened because that's what calcium does. It almost hardens a lot of these cells. That's where we produce our energy. That's where everything happens within the body. And what calcium does, it almost builds like a wall around these cells where it makes them not as able to absorb the very nutrients that are needed in order for that cell to function and thrive. One of those nutrients being glucose. Glucose is a form of carbohydrates. It's needed to prevent low blood sugar. Now, this is something that we see in something called cellular hypoglycemia. What does that mean? For many of these clients, they will have the symptoms of hypoglycemia, the ones that we just talked about, dizzy, lightheaded, shaky, always needing to eat, but they may not have the numbers that reflect that. So they might have all of those symptoms, yet their blood sugar is an 84. They might have all those symptoms, but their blood sugar is a 101 or 110, right? Not really reflecting a low blood sugar, but they have all of the symptoms related to low blood sugar. Well, what's really happening is they really don't have the energy that they need at the cellular level to continue on functioning, and therefore they get these symptoms related to low blood sugar. And it's frustrating because many of these clients do not have the validation from a glucose check, from an A1C, sometimes not even insulin markers, which are 3 of the most common blood sugar markers that are used to tell if someone is dealing with blood sugar issues. Many times they don't have abnormal testing that results from those. And as a result, they're like having these symptoms, but they don't know what to do about it. And their doctor's just like, hey, continue eating frequently, bring things with you, eat protein with your meals. And while maybe that helps in the moment to overcome those, it's not preventing or stopping those events from happening. Now, also in this process, extra calcium blocks magnesium, or magnesium is wasted because the body always tries to maintain a certain balance of minerals overall so it can function best. Calcium with magnesium, sodium with magnesium, calcium with potassium. When the body senses a rise in calcium, the body will use more magnesium to maintain that same level of balance. Because we use up a lot of this magnesium, something else needs to fill in the void of stabilizing those blood sugar levels, right? Well, that's many times where the hormone insulin starts to come in. And insulin is this hormone that helps us to prevent spikes. It helps to lower our blood sugar, right? And so if we don't have enough magnesium, insulin will step in to start to lower that blood sugar and prevent us from spiking into range. The problem is, like, too much of that insulin can make us more susceptible to those low blood sugar symptoms. And so you have those two things working against you when you're supplementing with vitamin D. And we see this all the time in clients' mineral tests, where something called their calcium to magnesium ratio often ends up being quite high. And that can be a sign that they're not processing carbs well and they're more at risk for hypoglycemia symptoms. Now, just like we talked about with calcium blocking glucose from getting into the cell where we really need it to take care of those low blood sugar symptoms, we also find the same thing is true with thyroid hormone. Now, when we have too much calcium at the cell level, it doesn't allow thyroid hormone to come into that cell and really do its job. Now, if you're not familiar with thyroid hormone, basically think about it as the driver of your metabolism that helps with energy, feeling warm, especially in the fall and winter months, losing weight, sleeping through the night, being able to tolerate carbs, and prevent low blood sugar issues. Now, calcium blocks this thyroid hormone from getting in and doesn't allow it to do its job. Now, in many of the clients that we work with that have this going on, they might be taking medications for their thyroid. They might have hypothyroid symptoms, but might not be on medication. And that might be all true, yet their labs look normal. And so when it comes to this piece, it's not about normal or abnormal labs typically. It's actually about, does the hormone that our body produces actually get to where it needs to go? And when we have a high calcium, it's probably not going to do that as effectively as it can, which is why with many clients that we work with, they have a really high thyroid ratio. And this is the balance between calcium and potassium. And when this balance is off, we tend to have more hypothyroid symptoms. Now, this leads to a downstream effect where our liver is a little bit more sluggish. And if we know anything about our liver helps us to store energy for later use so we can kick it out when we need it in the case of a low blood sugar, for example. But when it's more sluggish, we don't absorb that energy from our bloodstream as well, and we don't release it as well either. And so for many clients that have this hypoglycemia related to their thyroid, it's because their liver isn't kicking out as much glucose as it needs and as quickly as it needs to prevent that low blood sugar. And a doctor by the name of Broda Barnes, way back in the 1970s, supplemented his patients with thyroid hormone who had this hypoglycemia, found that their hypoglycemia disappeared. And so I'm not saying that, hey, you should go to your doctor and request thyroid supplementation. In fact, many people don't need that. And what we see for many clients, if they're on thyroid hormone and they really address this from a nutrition and a lifestyle perspective, they don't need as much thyroid hormone from their medication or can get off of it completely because they never needed it in the first place. And this is the type of hypoglycemia where typically you start to see those numbers come down, right? It's below 70, they're getting the symptoms, and it's real hypoglycemia that is often validated on a lab, whether that be an insulin marker or a glucose marker in itself. Now, last but not least, we have reactive hypoglycemia. And this is typically the harshest form of hypoglycemia because you don't just get the drops and crashes in blood sugar, you get the spikes too. And so for many people with reactive hypoglycemia, they're on this roller coaster all day long where they're really feeling depleted. And it's not just they're having the symptoms, they're having to obsess about food, they're constantly having to eat, but each time they spike and crash, it becomes even more depleting and even more depleting. And it adds and it adds and it adds until the person just does not feel functional whatsoever. They cut out exercise, they cut out eating out. Their whole day revolves around managing their blood sugar. They really can't live their lives. Some have to quit their job. Some can't drive. but at the very least, it substantially reduces their quality of life. So like we talked about, supplementing with vitamin D can create this cascade effect that can really lead to the body having a hard time both preventing the spikes, but also the crashes in blood sugar. And once that process is in motion, it can be really difficult to stop, where we've seen clients with this form of hypoglycemia for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years even, where they really become depleted and limited based on what they can do with their day. When we are taking a lot of vitamin D in the supplemental form, it causes our body to absorb a lot of calcium. When we absorb a lot of calcium, it kicks out other nutrients as well. So think about it like this. If there's too many people in a room, naturally people have to go in order for that room to stay comfortable, right? Well, that's a similar thing with these minerals. Calcium comes in, all these nutrients come out. And those nutrients just happen to be the very nutrients that help with blood sugar stability, preventing spikes, but also preventing crashes. Those nutrients just happen to be magnesium, what we talked about before, potassium, and sodium. Now, with magnesium, when we lose magnesium, like we talked about before, it creates more dependency on other things to keep our blood sugar within range. Because remember, magnesium helps to maintain insulin sensitivity. So when we produce insulin, it actually works effectively in really small doses. When we don't have enough, we need a lot more insulin in order to bring that blood sugar back down. And so it sets up a scenario where our body needs a lot of insulin in order to lower that blood sugar. That in itself can create a tendency for big spikes in blood sugar, release a ton of insulin, and big crashes. So that one is huge. Now we have potassium. Potassium is huge for tolerating carbs, for storing carbs away to prevent low blood sugar, for getting thyroid hormone into where it needs to go so our liver can actually kick out extra glucose. And it's really important, along with sodium, in helping with the health of our adrenals. What does that mean? Our adrenals are glands that produce stress hormones, and many of us view that in a very negative light, but stress actually helps us to prevent low blood sugar. It helps to kick out more glucose into our bloodstream so we can prevent those crashes. So even if we had this magnesium deficiency and we're needing to produce a lot of insulin in order to prevent those crashes, at the very least, if we had healthy adrenal function, what would kick in is our adrenals. And they'd say, hey, I have some carbs for you. Here, we can prevent this low blood sugar. When we don't have that potassium, when we don't have that sodium, those adrenals kind of wilt. They're not as functional. And they're less quickly to release that glucose. And so for many people with reactive hypoglycemia, they find themselves in this situation where they're spiking, their body produces a lot of insulin, they're crashing, and they can't prevent it. They can't stop it. And so they live their day with these big fluctuations in blood sugar, each one more becoming more depleting, right? And so the question becomes, what is causing these mineral imbalances? In this case, a big part of it can be related to vitamin D. And how do we start balancing those minerals so that we can retain more of them and then stabilize our blood sugar as a result? Each of these minerals is indirectly affected by vitamin D supplementation. Now, I will never say that vitamin D supplementation never has a time and place. But what I will say is, after working with hundreds of clients one-to-one who have had hypoglycemia, have benefited from removing it, have been able to maintain adequate vitamin D status as well, the juice of the vitamin D supplement is often not worth the squeeze. And in fact, you may be better without it. And if you are supplementing with it, it may be holding you back. Now, this is not medical advice. This is not me telling you to get off of your vitamin D supplement. This is not me saying that you need to go against your doctor's orders, but it does bring a different perspective, especially if you're struggling with hypoglycemia and you have a history of taking vitamin D supplements. So I hope that gives you a new perspective on vitamin D. I hope that challenges some of the benefits that you've seen before. I hope that gives you something to potentially act on and look more into. And if it did that, at the very least, that's what we want. If you have hypoglycemia and you're like, I don't know how to resolve this. I've been having this over the last 6 months, year, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, whatever it is for you, and you haven't quite been able to figure it out. 90% of our clients stabilize their blood sugar within 1 to 2 weeks, the other 10% in 30 days. And so if you're wanting to see not only some quick progress, but actually eliminate these low blood sugars completely, our one-to-one coaching program, the Pohlman method, may be the best fit for you. In this one-on-one program, it's our highest level of support, personalization in the labs that we just talked about today in this video. And I will put a link in the description below where you can apply to work with our team. And from there, if you qualify, we'll jump on a call to see if this is the right fit for you. If you're like Isaac, I don't really want that level of commitment. I just want to be told what to do. I can follow through with what you and your team say. If that's the case for you and you want to start seeing some more stable blood sugar in the next 30 days, our one-off consult may be the best fit for you. This includes one consult with our team, with or without labs, so that you can see some progress in the right direction as soon as possible while helping you identify and address the causes of your hypoglycemia. That is called our Pohlman protocol, and I will put that link in the description below as well. If you have any questions about either offer, feel free to comment below or send me a message on Instagram. If you like this video, check out this video where our client Savannah eliminated her reactive hypoglycemia, got her life back, got pregnant, all without cutting out carbs.